Okay, Mayor Gallego, I think we're ready we have a quorum, I think, and we're ready to start the meeting.
Good afternoon. I guess still good morning. A virtual meeting of the Transportation Policy Committee is called to order. Melissa, will you please call the roll?
Thank you, Chair Gallego, members of the TPC. I'll call your name. Please indicate if you're present for the record and be sure to unmute before responding. Rock Arnett.
I am here.
Thank you. Mayor Barney.
I'm here also.
Thank you. David Barry.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Binsbacher.
Here.
Thank you. Jen Daniels. Doug DeCluson.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Giles.
Here. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Hall. Mayor Hall, are you there? Mayor Hartke.
Here.
Thank you. Charles Huelmantel. Vice President Leonard. Mayor Peterson.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Price.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Osborne.
Present.
Thank you. Mark Reardon.
I'm here.
Thank you. Supervisor Sellers. Mayor Wires.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Weiss. Councilmember Whitehead.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Woods. And our chair is present. Is there anyone that I missed? Thank you. A quorum is present.
I apologize, Melissa. Jen Daniels is here as well.
Thank you, Jen.
Wonderful, thank you. An exciting day today. Congratulations to Mesa and Mayor Giles, who will deliver State of the City address today. Also want to recognize Scottsdale for their very important 7-0 vote last night. Congratulations, Councilwoman Whitehead. And I was sworn in on Monday, so thanks to the folks from the committee who reached out on that day, much appreciated. All attendees enter this meeting muted. Please remember to unmute your device before speaking and mute when you are not speaking to create a positive experience for all attendees. The next item is call to the audience. Members of the public were asked to submit written comments related to this meeting through the MAG website. Comments may be sent at any time leading up to the meeting, but must be received at least 1 hour prior to the posted start time for the meeting. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda or that are on the agenda for discussion and not action. MAG staff, have we received any public comments?
Yes, thank you, Chairwoman, members of the TPC. We did receive one public comment from Larry Schofield, and I'll begin the comment. Good morning, everyone. My name is Larry Schofield, and although I have lived in the East Valley for 55 years, I also work for the International Grooving and Grinding Association and the American Concrete Pavement Association. I wanted to let everyone know that the industry has created a coalition for responsible roads and a website to provide information to the public to promote responsible management of our taxes and our roads. The web address is www.freewaynoise.com. We were quite disappointed when MAG funded yet another noise study after ADOT had already determined there was not a noise issue. This is especially troublesome since millions of taxpayer dollars had previously been spent on the 15-year-long ADOT Quiet Pavement program. This is all money that could have been used on repairing our declining infrastructure in Arizona. We just want to remind MAG that over 7 million Arizonans pay for and use the freeway system, with approximately 5 million in the valley itself. Letting 200 citizens who purchase homes alongside a freeway decide how all of our money should be spent is not responsible management. We will be reaching out to Arizonans to get them to express their views, so all Arizonans are included. End comment, and that concludes public comment.
Thank you. The next item is approval of the consent agenda. Items 3A and 3B are on the consent agenda. Does any member of the TPC have questions or would like a presentation on any of these items? Could I have a motion to recommend approval of items 3A and 3B?
So moved, Mayor Hartke.
Second, Jen Daniels.
We have a motion from Mayor Hartke and a second from Jen Daniels. Is there any discussion? Roll call.
Thank you, Chair Gallego. Members of the TPC, I'll call your name. Please indicate how you vote on the motion. Be sure to unmute before responding. Rock Arnett.
Vote aye.
Thank you. Mayor Barney.
Aye.
Thank you. David Barry.
Aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Binsbacher.
Aye.
Thank you. Jen Daniels.
Aye.
Thank you. Doug DeCluson.
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Giles.
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Hall. Mayor Hartke.
Aye.
Thank you. Charles Humantle. Mayor Peterson.
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Price.
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Osborne.
Aye.
Thank you. Mark Reardon.
Aye.
Thank you. Supervisor Sellers. Mayor Wires.
I vote aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Whitehead.
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Woods.
Aye.
Thank you. And Chair Gallego.
I vote aye.
Thank you. Is there anyone that I missed? That consent agenda passes unanimously.
Item 4 is new resources for older adult transportation. MAG Deputy Executive Director Amy St. Peter will provide a report.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be with you today and to offer this presentation. The purpose of this presentation is to offer resources for transporting older adults, primarily through activities of Age-Friendly Arizona. The goal of Age-Friendly Arizona is to connect older adults with people of all ages in all of their communities. People can lose mobility at any time in any community, such as rural areas, including the one shown, as well as in more urban areas in our communities right here in the region. This can happen particularly when older adults can no longer drive. Through strategic coordination and diverse partnerships, where we are helping people to increase their mobility access and as a result to increase their quality of life while decreasing social isolation and particularly more costly interventions that can happen when one's health begins to suffer. Next slide, please. These are the topics that we'll be covering today. I encourage you to reach out at any time with questions or your feedback during the presentation now, as well as after the meeting. This item is offered for information and discussion. Next slide, please. The focus and approach of Age-Friendly Arizona has evolved throughout the years, but the goal has always been to connect older adults with their communities. We're indebted to the partners, the sponsors, the communities that have helped us throughout our journey and continuing forward. In particular, we want to thank Great Americans on Aging for mentoring us since the very beginning, as well as our very important local partners, such as the City of Phoenix, City of Tempe, AARP Arizona, ADOT, and nationally, our partners in the Federal Highway Administration. The Rural Transportation Incubator launched in 2019 with support from the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation with a $300,000 grant. Thanks to our partners, we're able to commit $1.7 million in cash match and in-kind contributions. We're thankful to all of our partners in all of this work. Next slide, please. The Rural Transportation Incubator then has three main areas of activity. The first is providing rides directly to older adults. Since the program began just 2 years ago, we've provided more than 36,000 rides to older adults with low incomes throughout the state of Arizona. The second area then is national replication. We have presented this work at 2 different national conferences as well as a national webinar. We do have our second webinar next week. I'll touch on that in just a moment. And then the third area is this, the technology solutions. We're using technology in a variety of ways to streamline those transportation services and to make them more effective and efficient. This website, AZ Ride Info, is just one example of the solutions that we're putting into place. We're excited to offer this new resource thanks to efforts by Dita Gastia and John Christensen and his team from our staff, as well as Todd Morris from NACOG and a whole host of partners, including the mobility managers statewide who have helped with the development of this site. For the first time ever, we have a centralized statewide interactive database of more than 300 different human services transportation providers. People can use this site and filter their search through the type of transportation service, the geographic location, and the eligibility for the different programs. We're finding as well that even people outside of the state are using this resource, particularly adult children of older adults who are living here in Arizona. They can go onto this site and find help to help their parents who are living right here in our communities. Next slide, please. This is another example of how we're using technology to connect people with important resources. This toolkit, Rides That Save Lives, is offered to assist people. This is located on the Age Friendly Arizona website. It was developed by Elliot Walker with SCP, our consultant, and David Dane on our staff. Next slide, please. These are the elements that the toolkit contains. We do hope that you'll use all of these resources and encourage others to do the same. We've all had to pivot in significant ways since the onset of the pandemic. Many of the human services transportation providers are facing decreasing numbers of older adults as well as resources. They've innovated in some really brave and nimble ways in order to connect the clients that they serve, particularly with the vaccine. They've offered a whole range of services, including drive-through clinics, as well as mobile vaccination units. They're also transporting food and other essentials and supplies to the older adults that they serve. We're very proud to recognize that our communities, our providers, are among the nation's best practices that we're seeing. Again, we do hope that you'll encourage others to use this website. Next slide, please. We're also using technology to help meet the statewide reporting needs for human services transportation. Providers and funders alike identified the need to streamline reporting in order to save time and provide better access to high quality data and reports. Working very closely right now with Amazon Web Services and ASU through the Cloud Innovation Center, they're partnering with us to develop this, the Transportation Reporting Information Portal System. We particularly like to thank the City of Phoenix and ADOT for their close partnership in the development of this idea. The KIC will share all of this work as an open source resource so that people all across the country can learn from the lessons that we are developing right here in Arizona. This includes us as well using this information then to support a competitive procurement or possibly doing the full build out of the portal in close partnership with others. Next slide, please. As we plan the functionality of this system, we're taking a look at, in particular, the reporting needs of Section 5310. This portal can be expanded to include other reports and funding sources, and as well as including customized report for regional planning agencies like MAG. Next slide, please. We've been mapping out the process flow through weekly workshops and identifying opportunities to improve this process as well. This will benefit funders such as the City of Phoenix through time saved and better access to high quality data and reports. Next slide, please. This is the webinar that I talked about coming up next week. This is a free event. We do hope that you'll join us and encourage others to do the same. We're very excited to offer this in partnership with Grantmakers in Aging as part of their webinar series that they're offering right now around older adults and the pandemic. It is free to attend. However, we do request that you register for that event at the link provided on the screen. Next slide, please. So as we're wrapping up this presentation, I would be remiss if I didn't thank all of our partners in this very important work. This includes the partners of the Rural Transportation Incubator. Next slide, please. As well as the communities that are delivering these very critical services to older adults in all of our communities throughout the state. Next slide, please. This does conclude my presentation. I'd be happy now to take any questions that you might have. And always please do feel free to reach out with any ideas or questions that you might have in the future. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Amy. It's certainly a point of pride for our county, the effort to make sure that we are age friendly. Are there any questions or comments from the membership? Appreciate the hard work on this, and I think it'd be great as many members of the committee can share the resource. I know there's still folks who need a little bit more knowledge about how to get to a vaccine. So this is great that it's available for this and other purposes. This is on the agenda for information and discussion only. Item 5 is an update on the development of a new regional transportation plan. MAG Transportation Staff Audra Kester-Thomas will provide a report.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the Transportation Policy Committee. Pleased to be with you today. Give you an update on the latest development activities associated with the RTP as well as extension of Proposition 400. Next slide. As included in your agenda packet for today, we have just completed survey research in the field and developed a summary report included in your agenda packet today. Our presentation will cover some of the highlights and key findings of that research, and then we'll conclude today talking about our immediate next steps as we enter probably the most exciting phase of the RTP development. Next slide. The survey work, as instructed by our policymakers, was intended to reach out and better understand where likely voters in Maricopa County were. Our intent was to identify transportation priorities, get reflections on tax level rate, duration, as well as better understand respondents' perspectives of their own financial situation to better inform whether or not the November 2022 election date for which we have planned is still the right time for an election. The survey was conducted in January and February of this year amongst over 1,000 Maricopa County likely voters. It is statistically significant with a margin of error of plus or minus 3%. It was a mixed mode survey using landline, cell phone, as well as an online panel to ensure we did receive a demographically representative sample of Maricopa County. Next slide. So first, let's concentrate on transportation priorities. Next slide. We first asked about individuals' perception of the current transportation system. And what we learned is that there's a high degree of support and satisfaction with the major components of our transportation system, notably our freeway and arterial network. Our light rail and transit components did decline in terms of overall satisfaction. If you've had a chance to review the report, you know that this will be a common theme that we will cover today. But overall, as we learned in our values mapping research 2 years ago, there's a high degree of satisfaction with the work you have all helped deliver over the course of the last couple of decades. We'll leverage that moving forward. Next slide. We asked for an open-ended question for individuals to identify their top transportation priority. You'll see reflected here those responses. If you're quick at math, you may observe it's over 100%. We took and wanted to record anything that individuals offered to this question, and so that in some cases included more than one response. But what you'll see here demonstrated is combined our transit elements for the top priority. Streets and highways continue to be a high priority for folks, as well as safety and active transportation. Next slide. This is the same responses, but what we've done in this chart is illustrate the top response within each of those categories. So light rail overall was the top response to that open-ended question, and specifically the response was expanding of light rail. You'll see also included in these top responses, maintenance and preservation of our roadway network, generally improving public transit, expanding bus routes as other examples of specific answers. Next slide. We then came back and offered 8 distinct categories for each respondent to rate in terms of their level of priority. That priority scale was on a scale of 5, 1 to 5, with 5 being a very high priority. And you'll see here all 8 categories score very high, illustrating the robust and diverse transportation needs constituents see here in the region. But top of that list is emerging technology, transportation technology, and innovation. So while it wasn't the top of mind answer when given as an open-ended response, when offered, it becomes the top priority amongst the vast majority of respondents. This is consistent with what we've heard already, and certainly the direction we've been taking, consistent with the feedback we've heard from you, that we need to plan for the future, have a future forward-looking plan, one that also includes that flexibility. Also want to make a note that 80% of all respondents indicated at least one element of transit as a high priority. Next slide. We also asked for reflections on the tax rate and duration. Next slide. You'll see here that there's a high level of support for a continuation of the established half-cent sales tax, with over 65% giving it a 5 or a 4 and a 5-point scale for level of support. Keep in mind, we have no specifics. We did not have any details or offer anything about the composition of a future investment portfolio. This is extremely encouraging response that there is a high degree of support for tax investment in transportation continuing on. And even still, when asked, over 45% or about 45% of individuals also supported an increase in that tax. Again, no details. There's no other information we provided. What this tells us is there's a high degree of room for having a conversation with our public. And I think this reflects also their high degree of satisfaction with the transportation investments made so far. Overall, only 8% of respondents were not supportive of either a continuation of the established tax or an increase thereof. Notable amongst these individuals was their general opposition for taxes, not necessarily specifically opposition to a transportation tax. Next slide. We offered an additional letter of information afterwards, indicating that our rapid growth in this region, our current level of investment would not be able to keep pace and be able to deliver a continuation of that investment or meet the needs today and into the future, and asked whether that additional information would change their level of support for an increase in the tax. And what we saw was it did. So even adding just a little bit more context, there's a lot of support, at least interest from constituents to hear about the constraints we're faced with, and you'll see an overall improvement in the amount of support for an increase in a tax. Next slide. One of the major takeaways from our research is then we came back and asked if the continuation of the tax focused in regionally significant investments, even if those investments may not be in their direct community, whether or not that would change their level of support. And what we saw was a resounding no. In fact, high degree of support for a continuation of regional focused investments. People really recognize that an improvement in one part of the system benefits the entire region. They're motivated by the better and greater good, and recognize also that they travel throughout the region as well. So when you ask for follow-up and provide context, they're reflecting on their need to move about the region, not just within their community. Next slide. We also asked about reflections on a tax duration. You'll see here a high degree of support for that continuation of a 20-year tax. Uniquely, although from us, without any context, without any information, 1 in 5 supported a permanent transportation sales tax. So something that was very interesting, one of our findings. Next slide. And finally, we wanted to better understand reflections on personal economic situations, again, to determine whether or not our November 2022 election date was correct. Next slide. And what we saw was a tremendous amount of reflection of a positive economic circumstance. Here you will see 65% of individuals reflecting that their current personal economic circumstance is either in excellent or good shape. You'll see almost 70% of individuals indicating that they believed their personal economic circumstance to either be the same or even improve over the next few years. Overall, we see a high degree of comfort in personal economic circumstance and outlook. And from that perspective, we do not believe there is an economic uncertainty in the perception of voters' minds that would alter our current plan, which is to go to voters in November of 2022. Next slide. So a couple key conclusions from our survey work. Next slide. We first wanted to better understand who are those individuals who support a tax increase. Our research team at West Group did some regression analysis, multivariate regression analysis to better tease these pieces out. And what you'll see highlighted in bold are the key drivers for those who support an increase in the tax. First and foremost, it's those who support a regionally focused investment package, even if those investments may not be within their community. These are individuals who improve or who understand improvements in the system are needed and would require an increase in the tax. Also, these are individuals who see transit investment as a high priority. To a lesser degree, and probably no surprise to you all, these are individuals that tend to be slightly more liberal than conservative and more optimistic about their current financial position. Next slide. So a couple different conclusions to offer as well. Voters are focused on the broad topics, the big ideas, not necessarily the specific elements. So that's really helpful for us as we move forward through this plan development process. They're interested in the outcomes. They're really focused on the issues and not driven by their own demographics. Our research team was very surprised to find very few demographic drivers or unique elements amongst demographics. Whether that's geography or age demographics, different kinds of populations, very similar across the board. In fact, there's regional consistency in both transportation priorities and support for the tax. So across the region, East Valley, West Valley, Center, very much consistent in the view of support for the tax as well as priorities. There's a high degree of support for a multimodal investment portfolio. This is notable. We've sometimes talked about splitting a question, whether that's focused on roadways versus transit. We're seeing and hearing that constituents are expecting a multimodal investment package. And then finally, there's a high degree of support for regional investments. Next slide. Next slide. So we are nearing really the meat of this process. I'll orient you back to our overall performance-based planning process. We are now at the end. We have developed 4 different scenarios for consideration. We will be sharing those next week, first with our management committee work group and bringing those through our committee process. They are intended to provide us as a starting point what we could deliver in this region within our budget. We have developed 2 scenarios at a half cent. We have also developed 2 scenarios that consider increasing the tax up to 1 cent to be able to demonstrate what else can be delivered if we do increase our investment. Next slide. Our focus and work over the next weeks and months will then be on moving from 4 potential alternatives down to a preferred scenario. This will occur over the course of the upcoming weeks and months with the intent to deliver and arrive at consensus about those major projects and programmatic investments by this summer, so we can move into and finalize the plan itself, making sure it meets our air quality conformity process. It's about a 5-month modeling process, and delivering the final plan for consideration and adoption at the end of the year. Next slide. We are also gearing up for a big public involvement focus. As you know, all along, we have been engaged with and inviting the public along for this conversation, sharing with you the feedback we have received along the way. We're focused on a big push in the middle of next month, bringing that feedback immediately back to all of you so you know where constituents are at, what they're saying, what their reflections are on these scenarios as well. Next slide. And so we'll look ahead of our focus. Again, our management committee work group will occur next week, where we'll be reviewing those 4 draft scenarios, reflecting on some of the key trade-offs, some of the key policies ahead. And then in May, what we'll be doing is working towards and working through those 4 draft scenarios. For Madam Chairwoman and TPC, one of our biggest, probably the biggest first questions we will have to answer is whether or not we are going to go over a half cent. That is fundamental to the composition of any of these scenarios. That will probably be the first question that we'll be asking our policymakers to make a determination on. And then again, working towards this summer to deliver and arrive at a preferred draft scenario. Next slide. Madam Chairwoman, I believe that completes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful, thank you. I think Very positive data for us. It's wonderful that our residents appreciate infrastructure and even in uncertain economic times know that it is important to invest. I was also excited to see how supportive they are of the innovation component we've been discussing. That was a positive result as well. What are questions and comments from membership?
Mayor Gallego, this is Jen Daniels.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. I just have a quick question for the statistic nerds in the group. Would we be able to get access to the crosstabs associated with the survey that was done of the residents? I think that might be helpful for us from a regional perspective, but also the individual cities may also have some insight there.
Madam Chairwoman, members of Transportation Policy Committee, our research team did put together, analyze those crosstabs, and for the significant elements included those details in the appendices of the report that was provided. By way of reminder, this is a statistically valid survey for the entirety of Maricopa County and unfortunately not at a level of individual jurisdictions. And so that data analysis was not indicated or included because it's not regionally significant. Or statistically significant, excuse me.
So just to clarify then, Audra, the respondents are located throughout Maricopa County, but if you broke it down by city, then you don't have a statistically valid survey.
Yes, ma'am. But what you will see included in the report is we were able to discern East Valley versus West Valley and Center. And so you will see in those few occasions where there is a minor difference that was statistically significant, those findings reported in the appendix of the report.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Madam Chair, Eric from Buckeye.
Mayor Osborne, please.
I actually had the privilege of being one of the surveyed. We talked with a surveyor on my cell phone, driving from Buckeye toward Gilbert, of all places. And for more than half of that trip, we were able to answer the questions. And so could not more enthusiastically tell them that I think we need to invest in infrastructure, and that is region-wide. And we are all for an increase in funding. So at least one of those percentages, or a very small percentage, is me saying, "Yay, let's go for it." So thank you for that. I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record, and I want to make sure that Buckeye is heard, and the entire committee understands when we talk about infrastructure projects in the city of Buckeye. And I explained to the residents that State Route 30, at least a portion of it, or an interim condition, was in the program that voters approved in 2004, but it may not be constructed as part of the existing program, and it's, at least at this point, potentially not constructed in the extension. Voters that were here voted on that, approved that, and we're expecting that was going to happen. And in this case, we're not doing what we said we would do. I know I've discussed recently at the TPC meeting where it was voted on, and State Route 30 was to get priority moving forward in the consideration for the extension. And at this point, that route that is from 303 to State Route 85, we're not following through with what we said we would do in 2019 at the committee level, and I believe the regional council level. So I'm concerned that if we continue this route and not including State Route 30, it's going to be a tough sell with voters when you go to them and ask them to vote for a regional sales tax for infrastructure improvements, and tell them, trust us, we'll put the improvements in that's going to make your life better. But we didn't do that the last time, and we're contemplating not doing that again this time. So from the Buckeye perspective, we really need to consider an increase in the sales tax and doing what we said we would do, which is building the infrastructure that was in the original, the Prop 400, and the stuff that the cities are asking for in the extension. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor Gallego, Bridget Peterson from Gilbert. First, want to thank Eric Orsborn for heading out to Gilbert for whatever his reason was to visit us, and to Jen Daniels for being the data nerd that I love her for. And wanted to ask Audra a little more follow-up on the public participation between now and the next time. You kind of touched on it. Can you give us maybe a little bit more detail on that, Audra?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Chairwoman Gallego, Mayor Peterson. So we are focused on a 2-week period in particular where we'll be hosting various virtual events and activities, different times of the day on the weekend, and intent to intrigue folks to come and talk with us, learn more, provide their feedback. We'll also have a 24/7 virtual opportunities. Folks can come to us in their pajamas, eating cereal, and watch and learn the information themselves and provide the feedback. We'll also be using some other new tactics, including a chat bot where you can talk with us one-on-one with the planner. So similar to how you may do some online customer service nowadays using your computer to interact with an operator. We're going to leverage that similar technology, both in English and in Spanish, where folks can reach out directly to our planning team and interact with. So we're excited to probably try out some of those opportunities. We're also taking any opportunity we can to speak with any sort of group or interests. Mayor, I had the opportunity to speak with your youth commission last night, or your youth council, excuse me, I believe youth advisory committee. And they had fantastic, fantastic questions. You should be proud of the leaders coming up in the town of Gilbert. So we were able to work with them last night, getting their feedback. Those are opportunities we indulge in. Any opportunities that any of you have, please forward us. We will make every accommodation to be virtually with folks. So that's kind of a high level overview, Mayor Peterson, about our outreach portfolio. Really will be leaning on you to help amplify these opportunities with constituents.
Great. That's great, Audra. And thanks for mentioning the Mayor's Youth Advisory Committee last night. I heard their questions for you were outstanding, and I'm so impressed by them. Thank you. Thanks for the follow-up too.
Any additional comments or questions?
Yeah, this is Jack Sellers.
Go ahead, Chairman Sellers.
I just want to apologize. I just now joined the meeting, but I will review the minutes when I get them and get caught up from that. We had a board meeting that just finished, so I apologize for joining late.
We are very glad to have you. And I mentioned your name earlier because you and I have had conversations about the portion of this that might set aside money for innovative solutions in the future. And it looks like the voters are with us that is a good idea. It was the top ranked among the prompted ones.
Mayor Gallego, it looks like Eric might have something to add.
Please, Eric.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the TBC and Supervisor Sellers. I'd be more than happy to give you a briefing on the survey results if you'd like. Just contact our office and be happy to set that up. And that goes to any member of TPC too. So happy to spend additional time. And if people want to go do a deeper dive in it, we certainly can do that too.
Thank you. And as you know, I will ask questions if I have any.
No doubt.
Through the chair.
Mayor Harkey.
Audra, I also want to thank you for looking at these results. And I know that looking at the future of transportation has been a big priority of within me for us to consider over the span of this. So I'm pleased to see that I'm not out there by myself on that particular one. And so that's, to me, is good news and forward thinking with us. And look forward as we continue this process and start dialing down both to an amount as well as the specific projects and see how they impact all the regions of our city. That's all I got.
Well said, thank you. This item is for information and discussion only. If I do not see any additional,
Mayor Gallego?
please go ahead.
Yeah, David Berry with Knight Swift Transportation. And I think the study is very good. We are in complete support, but just something to consider as we go forward. And that is driverless vehicles are going to be in our future. I don't know exactly when in that future, but we're going to have driverless vehicles and we're going to have electrical vehicles. In both of these are going to have, we have to think very carefully about how we use those, how they're taxed, how they're used, the safety implications, all of these things over the next 20 years. And we need, and will our half-cent sales tax be enough in order to have the types of roads and infrastructure that we need? Because who's going to pay? We have a very good system with the gasoline tax and registration fees. We also have electric cars that are coming up, but who's going to pay for that electricity, and how is that going to be worked into the system? And we want to be sure that we have adequate funds in order to take these new technologies forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing any additional comments, we will move to item 6, which is a legislative update. MAG Policy and Government Relations Director Nathan Pryor will introduce this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Transportation Policy Committee. Today, we have a guest speaker, Eric Zimmerman, who's the Deputy Director and Transportation Director at the National Association of Regional Councils, also known as NARC. Eric is going to be providing a federal overview. Clearly, there's a lot of activity going on with the proposed American Jobs Act, the infrastructure bill, ongoing community project funding, also known as earmarks. And of course, we saw recently the American Rescue Plan, also probably a little bit more mid to long range conversation on surface transportation reauthorization, also very important. So a lot going on the federal front, and we've invited Eric Zimmerman to present today. And Madam Chair, with that, I'll turn it over to Eric.
All right, well, thank you so much, Nathan. Thank you, Mayor Gallego and the members of the committee for having me here today. As Nathan mentioned, there is quite a bit to cover, so I'm going to take a dive right in. Next slide. So we're going to start. As I mentioned, there's a lot going on in Washington right now. The big item of discussion at the moment is what we expected all along was a COVID recovery package. We saw the response package, of course, pass earlier this year. And with this now discussed recovery package, we're really thinking about this in sort of a medium-term view. So the original idea was to have something by late summer. I think that may have slipped potentially a little bit, that we're perhaps looking for something into the fall. We've long thought that the most likely path to something along these lines is the reconciliation process that they use to pass the response bill. There has been a little bit more discussion lately about the potential for splitting the bill into a couple of different components, in part with an eye toward keeping it bipartisan. And we'll have to see how that shapes up. I think we'll start to get some view of that fairly quickly, as this bill will take a while to come together. So if they do want to move on something, even as early as late summer or in the fall, they'll have to get moving on it fairly quickly. I'm sure folks are somewhat aware of the reconciliation process. This is where it only takes 50 votes in the Senate, or rather 51 votes in the Senate to pass the bill, so long as it has budgetarily related items solely in the bill. And it's really not a vehicle for creating new policy. So we don't expect that this would be a vehicle for reauthorization or a gas tax increase. And in fact, I actually think one thing it's important to note is that there really has been sort of blurred lines in this conversation between infrastructure package and reauthorization. So if you are unclear at any given moment, if a member of the administration or if an elected official or others are talking about one or the other, and you aren't clear which one that is, it's not just you. That's kind of the prevailing idea. And I think part of that is intentional as they try and keep the patina of potential bipartisanship of this package. But I think things will start to clarify fairly quickly as to which we're talking about. If we're talking about something that's more reauthorization focused or something that is more, this new infrastructure package. Next slide. So the administration, of course, proposed its American Jobs Plan along these lines. It's a $2.3 trillion proposal spent out over about 8 years. So that equals about 1% per year of GDP being spent on what I believe we could all agree is a fairly expansive view of infrastructure, at least relative to where we have been in recent years. Of course, includes things like transportation, but you'll also see a number of other areas with some significant amounts of funding committed to them, including things like manufacturing, workforce development, affordable housing. So things that, there is some discussion about how broadly we should be defining infrastructure, how broadly that goes out. But certainly for purposes of this proposal, it does take a fairly expansive view of that. Next slide. Taking a little bit of a closer look at some of the transportation elements of the package, they, instead of just putting money out and saying, here it is, do with it what you will, they actually did set some goals around some of these funds. And so in transportation, their focus is on modernizing and fixing 20,000 miles of roads, focusing on bridges, both the sort of regionally and nationally important bridges that carry a great deal of freight, for example, as well as focusing on bridges at the more state and local level, fixing 10,000 deficient bridges there, and then also a focus on transit, both from the side of new buses, but also the potential to expand routes and serve folks that are currently not being served by transit at current or being served now. Next slide. I'm not going to go too much into the details on any individual spending item, but I think seeing it laid out, it does give you an idea of where they're prioritizing the funding being spent. I will note a couple of programs that I think are of note. The $44 billion committed to large projects. These are the types of projects that are regionally and potentially even nationally significant, but tend to be of a far more complex nature and therefore much harder to fund through the current funding path that we have now. And so this is a bill, this is a program that would help push some of those items forward and focus on those large regionally significant projects. Next slide. Another big area of focus that I believe will remain an area of focus as we move into Congress writing something of this legislation will be this investment in electric vehicles. We see they committed $160 billion for that purpose, plus another $14 billion in tax incentives to encourage the purchase of these vehicles. And that includes the goal of 50,000 charging stations across the nation. So a very significant investment, very widespread, and something I think will be very interesting to see how they structure this program as we move forward. And then another $25 billion for equity and access, which has been a big focus of the administration and something that they are putting some funding toward in a way that we haven't really seen in the past. Next slide. So the expected pay for, I'm sure folks have heard about, they would do a corporate tax increase. There's a lot of discussion about whether this is the appropriate funding mechanism. As we all know, transportation and infrastructure generally is underfunded at the moment, so something does need to change. There will be an ardent discussion about the pay for and how that's going to proceed. We aren't clear yet what the local match is going to look like on this, what the timing is going to be, where the support is going to come from. And those are all things that we're going to see play out here over the next little while. But keep in mind that this is really a first draft by the administration. This is not, I'm not expecting that this is reauthorization. And so we'll see how this proceeds from here and what Congress chooses to do with it. Next slide. And so that then leads us into Fast Act reauthorization. My belief at the moment is that though the program expires on September 30th, that this is probably a longer term pursuit. We'll be pushing this into 2022 perhaps. This is more likely to go through regular order where you get agreement between the House and Senate. Both chambers have indicated they expect a fast process, but that certainly does not guarantee a fast outcome. So I think we'll see some movement on this in the near term, but the question will really be whether we see action on this in the near term or whether, as I expect, it gets pushed back. Our priority here is, as it always is, pushing funding down to the local level for local prioritization, as well as providing metropolitan planning funding, the funding that goes to MAG and others to do the type of long-term and planning that they are so good at doing. Next slide. And then finally, I'll touch very briefly on earmarks. We do expect that they are back. It has received the approval in the House of both the Democrats and the Republicans. Remains to be seen what the Senate plans to do. I know MAG and others have been hard at work working with members of Congress to put together priorities for this. A couple things I'll note. These projects are encouraged to be on the TIP or the STIP in order to qualify. And this was a vetting issue. The congressional staff wouldn't possibly have time to go through thousands of unvetted projects, and so it used this methodology in order to make decisions about which projects to include. I'll also note that this is allowing additional project phases to be included. It used to be that these were typically for projects that were sort of ready to roll out the door, but they've expanded that, recognizing that some projects are worthy of funding that aren't necessarily so-called shovel ready, but that are in earlier phases of development. We expect about $15 to $20 million per member of Congress that chooses to earmark. That would be on top of current funding within the bill, which is very important. It will not cannibalize the funding that currently flows through the program. Next slide. I think that's all that I had for now. I know that is a lot crammed into a very brief presentation, so I'm certainly happy to answer any questions and expand on anything that you have questions about. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for that update. Members of the committee, any questions? All right, well, that certainly would be new resources for our quickly growing county. So thank you, Eric, and please keep us updated.
Will do. Thanks for having me.
And Nathan, anything else for your report?
Madam Chair, no, thank you.
Wonderful. That is certainly enough and much appreciated. Notable that the administration did release an Amtrak map that included an addition in our region. Are there any requests from membership for an item on a future agenda? Given both Mr. Berry's comments as well as Eric's mention of the electric vehicles in the federal plan, I think it would be good for this group to see an update on electric vehicles in the Valley. So I think that would be a good item for a future agenda. Are there any comments or announcements from the membership? Business is now concluded. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much.